Okay. All right. Ugh, got my Adderall, got my coffee, my notes. Okay. Hey guys, so my name is Michael Schlenk, and today I'll be talking with you about my honors project in my human sexuality course. Specifically, I am examining why do heterosexual men engage in down-low sex with gay men. And throughout the study, you'll hear me say men who have sex with men, and that's who I'm referring to. But, you know, you see these people on these dating apps all the time, at least for, I mean, not everyone, because not everyone's gay, but I do. You know, on Tinder and Grindr, you get the faceless profiles, you get the profiles with just black, you know, and the profile names like mask for mask, meaning masculine for masculine men, DL straight, down low straight guy. But I think it's, you know, interesting that most of the studies I'll be reporting on are actually from Australia. And to further that, these Australian studies are actually referencing America in their discussions and in their introductions. And so I will pretty much be discussing the whys, you know, as in why do men who have sex with men engage in down low sex in terms of stigmatized reasonings and non-stigmatized reasonings. And then after that, we're going to discuss the implications, because there are some important things to consider about this information. I also want to point out that this is a very small area of research, so the literature is very, very limited, but it's my hope that, you know, we can kind of destigmatize sort of sexual exploration and kind of promote education in terms of sexual safety. But yeah, here we go. So in terms of stigmatized reasonings, I'm really centering this around this idea that identities are inconsistent, and I'll post the study like up there if I'm good at editing. So we as a society love to label people, right? Gay, straight, you can't really be in between. However, our behaviors, sexual behaviors, are often inconsistent with these identities, even if we aren't trying, or even if we don't intend to separate ourselves from our identity. So for example, you know, girls make out with their friends at sleepovers, there's sexual exploration and experimentation in college, and even threesomes, right? And I point this out to say that if our labels were so finely created and so discrete from one another, we wouldn't engage in these behaviors. And so why are there stigma? Why is there stigma around this? That's sort of what leads these men to down low sex is what I'm examining. All right, so let's start. So the first one is actually a very interesting article that examined the male G-spot. And if you don't know what the male G-spot is, it's a colloquial term for the prostate. Because in men, when that's stimulated, it actually provides an immense amount of pleasure. It can be, it's very, very pleasurable. And one study that examined 170 heterosexual men found that 95% had heard about this, right? And 75% heard this information and labeled it reliable, while only 11% of the people in the study were surprised. Now, in terms of personal experience, what these heterosexual men have done in terms of, you know, anal sexual activity, about a quarter reported having anal sexual activity, 16% reported self-penetration with their fingers, and 5% reported any type of stimulation that didn't involve penetration. So this could be anal massaging, this could be rubbing, external rubbing, right? And so we're acknowledging that some men are engaging in some form of anal pleasure, right? Whether that be penetration, massaging, rubbing, what we just talked about. And we also are finding in this study that it's acknowledged that the prostate can be pleasurable, but why are they not necessarily, you know, engaging in any of these behaviors, right? So when asked that, why don't they engage in, you know, exploring their pleasure with the male G-spot, is that 29% said they were not interested. 17 believed it would be uncomfortable and painful, which is what we will talk about when we discuss implications. There's a lot of overlap there. 14% said that they were not comfortable with the idea of having anal sex. 24% were concerned that they would be perceived as gay, which is kind of colloquially termed as homohysteria. And interestingly, 79% reported being uncomfortable with asking their partner, right? And this is where I find very interesting, because this sort of leads into other reasonings within our discussion, is at the end of the day, right, if we take away this label, if we take away the stigma behind what it means to have anal sex and our labels in terms of sexual identity, it's just another orgasm, right? It's another way to have pleasure in your sexual life, right? And it's very interesting to me that asking their partner is the highest reason cited for not engaging in this behavior. So I mentioned this perceived consequences of identity inconsistent behavior, right? When I mentioned how we engage in threesomes and that's not necessarily consistent with our sexual identity. One study actually examined heterosexual men and their perceived consequences for these identity inconsistent sexual behaviors. And what they found is that heterosexual men believed that there would be more lifestyle changes, there's increased risk for harm and stigma, there are more issues concerning their self-perception, and there are greater consequences for their social supports and networks. And I think that is a very important one, because one of the most protective factors for mental illnesses and the promotion of treatment and overall response is in fact having a social network and social support system. So, in kind of congruence with these stigmatized reasonings, let's look at non-stigmatized reasons, okay? I have work order people here. Oh my god, the maintenance guys are at my apartment, hang on. Okay, so I think it's important that when we're considering, DL sex with heterosexual men and gay men, we have to really, let's look at the reasonings why. And this one study found that historically, and I've seen this in my own, anecdotally, I've seen this in my own experience, is that men who have sex with men do so out of being closeted, out of repressing their own sexuality. When in fact, maybe there are some more contemporary and perhaps more accurate interpretations of why DL sex exists. And of course it can include being closeted, but I think here, let's discuss some key differences as to why else, I should say, that men engage in DL sex. So perhaps their sexual identity is in fact straight, or at least not gay, but they're engaging in gay sex for pleasure, right? They just want an orgasm. It doesn't have to be some sort of labeled activity. It can just be sex. Another key factor is curiosity, right? And this can be curiosity around gay sex, curiosity around anal sex. And there is a little bit of a caveat that I'll expand on in a little bit more of a study, in a different study, excuse me. But yeah, curiosity surrounding exploration with sex and so on. And lastly, perhaps publicly they're straight, right? Culturally they're straight, but in private, their sex life, they're gay. And this can be because of institutions such as their family, religion, even culture, right? Geographically speaking, there are certain cultures where gay sex is not accepted, more so than others, and that can provide a very, limiting narrative as to what is allowed and what is not allowed for heterosexual men and homosexual men. But I think also another important aspect of this is the social understanding of sex and sexuality is that we as an American society live in this binary classification, right? We want things to be simple. We want them to be easy to understand. We don't like when people don't fit into categories. And so if we are engaging in DL sex, and we're having to sort of go down low, and it's not looked upon in a positive way, right? It's why are you being sneaky with sex? Why are you cheating on your spouse or your wife or your partner? And this lack of acceptance and this lack of acknowledgement sort of almost promotes or potentiates this behavior of down low sex. And so, sometimes it is outside of being closeted and being sexually repressed, some might say. But I don't know if America's ready for that one. Okay, anyways, let's move on. Kind of piggybacking off these perceptions of down low sex, the next thing we're going to talk about examines motivations for casual sex for men who have sex with men and trans women, right? And as I mentioned earlier, perhaps they just want to have sex, right, without the label. Perhaps it has nothing to do with the man who they're having sex with themselves. And we'll take this a step further here, right? In hetero relationships, sometimes there can be an imbalance in terms of what is needed or what is required to have sex, right? So some women may want men to do more chores. Some women may require more emotions towards sex, and some women just may not, quote unquote, be in the mood, a little bit more colloquially. And so engaging in sex with men and trans women provides an easy and uncomplicated access, right? We don't have to have this hyper emotional sex. We can just have sex and not have to label it. And kind of expanding on this is experimentation. And I mentioned experimentation earlier in terms of challenging the perceptions of men who have down low sex. But experimentation doesn't have to mean gay sex itself. It can, of course. But this can also include kinks, fetishes, or sexual acts that their female spouse may not be willing to entertain, right? And as we saw in the male G-spot study, 79% of those participants were uncomfortable asking for anal sex, or asking for exploration of that. So, coming back to this study, engaging in sex with gay males or trans women provides a little bit more comfort and a little bit more ease at being able to explore the sexual acts, sexual pleasures that you may not be comfortable with in your hetero relationship. And also, it just creates less judgment, right? And so lastly, men who have sex with men and trans women kind of provide the second choice, right? It kind of provides a backup plan, if you will. Meaning, if their spouse is not around, right? If they feel the desire to have sex when their wife or spouse is not around, or perhaps the perception that a cisgendered female partner is not around, then engaging in sex on the down low with gay males or trans women provides an opportunity for that outlet to occur. So that covers non-stigmatized reasonings themselves. It also has not only does it have hang on, let me fix my hair. Okay, but why do we care? Okay, why do we care about men who are supposedly, in our minds, compromising morals that they should all have, based on our own beliefs? And we recognize that there are stigmatized reasons and there are non-stigmatized reasons, but why do we care about such a small population in the literature? And I think we should care because the sort of stigma that we attribute to this sexual behavior and sexuality has real life implications for the sexual health of these people. So for example, as we've seen throughout the studies that I've discussed, there are stigmatized and non-stigmatized reasonings. Now, if we're talking in a health setting, stigma can come from ourselves, right? We can attribute it to ourselves through our sexual acts, whether it be cheating, whether it be identity inconsistency stress, or whether it be stigma from doctors, right? This sort of power imbalance in terms of what is right and wrong with sexual health and sexual health behaviors. And what this all leads to is a lack of information, right? So this can lead to a lack of health-seeking behaviors as well, right? It's already awkward and it's already discomforting discussing sexual health with your doctor, right? And it doesn't have to necessarily be because sex is awkward, but when it becomes very analytical, when it becomes very anatomical, right? Penis, vagina, clitoris, and it doesn't become more of a sort of I can talk to you, it kind of can become easy to avoid that, especially if we're engaging in behaviors such as DL sex with men who have sex with men. That's not going to be received well. In fact, it's not received well already. So we might not even go to our doctor's appointments, right? We may avoid them, we may cancel them. And another thing is that some of these men who have sex with men feel the need to call themselves gay when they may not identify that way because of how it would be received by the physician, right? It's really easy to say, hey, I'm gay, this is what I do, than it is to say, hey, I'm straight and I have sex with women, but I also engage in sex with men on the side and I do this, this, and this, right? Sometimes it just kind of creates ease. And another thing is that discussion of disclosure with sexuality in men who have sex with men was also associated with anal sex. So if we are seeing that there is a lack of disclosure and that there is a lack of health-seeking behaviors, but when we do it's associated with anal sex, this sort of leads into the real-life implications of sexual health itself. So for example, a lot of men who have sex with men in the study that they found or discussed with health providers is that much of gay sex, in this case or in this context, is learned by trial and error. And this sucks because it leads to a lot of expectations. One, it creates this expectation that anal sex should be painful and discomforting, right? Well, it might feel weird when you first start, right? Like anytime you do something new, it feels awkward and it's not the most comfortable, but it should never be painful, right? That's why lube exists. That's why condoms exist. That's why, you know, there's foreplay. There are lots of things you can do, right? Then this also is a problem for sexual health, as in it leads to a very large trust that gets put onto potentially someone you don't even know for DL men who have sex with men, right? If I'm doing trial and error and I'm receiving or topping or bottoming or topping for the first time, that's a lot of trust to put into someone. And you may run into troubles with protection, right? Are we going to wear a condom? Are we not going to? Are you going to pull out? Are you not going to? It's almost this gray area, right? What is and what is not going to be talked about. And this unfortunately can lead to learning by consequences. And the study references anecdotally a man who was having sex with a man, and one of them was getting tested for STIs, and they went to the clinic, and the man would not show up to comfort him because he was afraid of being perceived as gay just by association and just for the reasons of that visit. And another reason that this is an issue is because of the emotional investment, right? Perhaps one person is more emotionally invested in the sexual partner than the other, even though this is down low sex, right? A lot of these emotional investments that are being found in the study comes from these feelings of stigma and sexual health concerns. But that interrupts sex, so it doesn't get talked about, which leads to these increased risks for STIs, increased risks for transmission of STIs, and increased risks of contracting STIs. So it's my hope through discussing these articles with you and discussing sexual health with you that we sort of end the stigma around sexual health, right? End the stigma around sexual behavior, regardless of who it is, what we do, because that is how we stay safe and that is how we prevent any accidents or oopsies. And I think this is important because a lot of what we're taught in school is not an accurate representation, right? You're taught black and white, you're taught good and bad, you're taught the absolute best and the absolute worst case scenarios. And so I think it's important that people consider these sort of gray areas that don't fit in to these traditional values or traditional categories that we as an American society create. But yes, I thank you for watching this video. I had a lot of fun doing it. I also loved how I was discussing it while my maintenance man was here right outside my door. So anyways, toodaloo girly, until next time, bye.